All right, welcome back to Cannabis in Canada with Jason Wilcox. We're just going to keep it on with the provocative move made by the Vancouver. Again, this is the chief license inspector who made a very provocative stance, a proposal to city council and to the mayor of the city, where this would license and regulate dispensaries. And who better to have on the show than Dana Larsen, owner.
Right on.
Dude, you do so much, Dana. I was just going to say owner of the Vancouver Dispensary, Sensible BC. There's so much that you do within the community. Welcome to the show, and this is like my third interview just going tonight on this topic. So, right off the hop, yeah, it is. It's a big topic. Now, first off, did you have any prior knowledge of this? Because everybody I've interviewed and talked to, nobody's seen this proposal coming. It just kind of was like, boom, out of the gate.
Well, I didn't know it was going to come out that week or anything, and they didn't consult with me or any other dispensary-related people before putting it out. But it's not a surprise that the city wants to do something. I think people who were expecting the city to continue to do nothing and allow there to be hundreds and hundreds of dispensaries opening up, it's not realistic. And so if you'd asked me 6 months ago, is there going to be some kind of regulation coming out of the city in the next year? I would have said yes. I very much expect that to happen. But the details they put together and the exact timeline and everything, I didn't have any. We kind of heard a little bit, maybe something was going to be coming down the pike, but yeah, it certainly was a surprise to me in that sense.
Okay, what would be your take here? Let's just jump into the proposal. Let's try and look at what this means. Now, right off the hop, one of the things we talked about was that 300-meter distance. What exactly does that mean? 360 degrees circumference. That's that distance. In which case, it would render a lot of downtown dispensaries, basically within each other's space. And
yeah, absolutely.
How then would they deal with that scenario? Like, for instance, your club would be within 300 meters of weeds. Your one dispensary. This is just...
Oh yeah, almost all of our clubs. There's other ones too that are within 300 meters. I mean, both of our locations, we have one on East Hastings. Yeah. That one, I don't think there's any other dispensaries in 300 meters, but we've got a community center on the corner that we feel we have a very good relationship with and have had over the past 7 years. We've been open now, but we'd have to move there. Our other one on the west end has got several dispensaries around us, and we're right on the edge of a 300-meter limit as the crow flies from another kind of community center, I think, too. And even the BC Compassion Club Society, and this might have got mentioned earlier, but they've been around longer than any other club, I think like 17 years or something. And a private school opened up near them several years after they'd been open. I think they even have grade 12 students come and doing like tours of their place every year to learn about medical cannabis, and they would have to move because of that, even though they got a great relationship. So, maybe there'll be some kind of grandfathering or something, I don't know. But even if there was, it would probably only affect us and the BCCS and maybe to one or two other places. But I don't expect them to grandfather within us in either. I expect we're probably going to have to move one or both of our locations. And it's going to be kind of an interesting monopoly game on where these places are going to go and who's going to be. People are scrambling and trying to work together as well, I think, to be harmonious. I've talked to people who were thinking about moving into certain areas and are like, well, I don't think I'm going to now because those guys are there. I don't mind competing with them, but I don't want to move into their territory and have them get shut down necessarily, right? Mm-hmm. So people are trying to find a way to make it work, but there's definitely going to be some people who are not going to make it through this process who are going to have to decide if they want to fight civil disobediently or otherwise, or whether they're going to shut down, and how the rest of us are going to relate to that or how it's going to work, that still's got to be figured out.
Now, you and I are passionate about extractions and about the need for that for medical patients. We know what it can do for them. This proposal bars medical extractions.
I think it just bars edible products. So that's not necessarily, I don't think it would bar like a bubble hash or other kinds of, or dabs or things like that. As far as my reading of it, those things would be allowed. And but it does want to ban, I think especially the focus that they're worried about are things like baked goods. I'm not really sure if a capsule or a tincture or drops under the tongue are considered edible, but I don't think so. And although we'll have to see clarification on that and what that means, right? And so they propose that you make available some kind of a cooking oil or infused oil that people can then take home and put into their own baking, which is kind of an odd thing. And I can see some people drinking the oil or whatever.
I was going to say, isn't oil not a food product still, though?
Yeah, and it depends what kind of oil you make. I mean, you could even, so it's an odd thing. But I think that their worry is that people can and do eat too much food sometimes and get too high. I mean, nothing bad is going to happen to you, but you definitely can feel uncomfortable, feel like you're going to die, have to go to the hospital because you're freaking out or whatever.
Panic
that does
attack,
happen to
yeah.
people. Yeah, you get panic and you can feel nauseous and uncomfortable. And I think that they're worried about that and trying to control it. But I would rather see, things like childproof packaging, standardized dosages, making sure each dose is individually wrapped and rules like that. But it's very challenging for the city they can't put in those kind of quality control rules. That's beyond their ability to do so in terms of what their regulatory options are. So I'm hoping we can negotiate something, because I'd love to see edibles on the menu. And if you're worried about dosage and potency, putting it back onto the black market on the underground, which is where they would go, is not going to make that anybody safe. People are still going to be using edibles. They're just not going to be getting them from the licensed dispensaries. They're going to be getting them from the underground, and they're going to have more problems and more dosage issues and more people freaking out and more people whatever. So I think that's not really the solution. It's going to have unintended consequences putting that ban in place.
Well, that's what I'm wondering too, is what's going to happen? Is this going to potentially harm the medical patients in BC in the intern by going ahead, at least in Vancouver, I should say, by sanctioning X, Y, and Z club and then banning and shutting down our other clubs, when we know holistically all the clubs provide a service to BC and BC patients?
Well, absolutely. I'd like to see there be as many clubs in Vancouver as the market can bear, like we do with any other business. The city doesn't have a quota on coffee shops or a quota on any other kind of business, except, as far as I know, they have zoning regulations and things like that, but there's no real limit. And it's effectively putting this 300-meter limit between dispensaries and also between schools and things. And we should point out that for liquor stores, the limit's 150 meters, not between each other, but between liquor stores and schools and things like that. So we know cannabis is safer than alcohol, but if you want to make that comparison, then why do we have to be twice the distance away from those places in liquor stores?
And why ban that? On that note, the proposal bans it on Granville Street, where there's a lot of dispensaries right now that are working, and they ban it in that district. But I was talking earlier on with another guest just about that issue, that they ban it on Granville, but they allow all those bars and all those taverns to just sit there and get drunk.
It is an issue, and especially because we spend $1 million a year policing liquor problems on Granville Street. And I know those bars pay a premium, but they're not paying $30,000 a year, as far as I know, for their permits either, which is the figure they want from dispensaries, about 35 plus more. But yeah, so I don't know. They've also banned the downtown East Side area, except for Hastings and Main. But Hastings and Main are so dotted with community centers and private schools and things that there's very limited options there. And yet they mentioned in their own documents that they understand that cannabis is useful harm reduction for people who can be opiate addicts or have other drug addiction issues, which is very progressive of them to talk about that and admit that. But then why limit them from being in the downtown East Side in that way? Though some of those people are the sickest people who need the most cannabis help and at the best prices, and to limit it like that. And we're right on the edge of the downtown East Side, and there's the other dispensary in there as well. The Eden Dispensary has one right in sort of the heart of the downtown East Side, and there's other ones there too. And it just seems odd, some of those limits. I don't really understand their thinking about blocking it off of Granville or off of a lot of the downtown East Side. I don't know what that's supposed to be helping or where that logic comes from.
Well, what's your take on them now lumping us together, lumping clubs together or dispensaries into marijuana-related issues or marijuana-related, marijuana-related licenses?
Oh, well, there's that phrasing in there where they say you got to be 300 meters from like other places that advocate for medical cannabis or something. And that, I think that wording is going to change, because advocacy, I mean, that means that if like Van City says we support medical marijuana, which they do, I have done, that means you can't set up near Van City. Like, I think they should say where medical marijuana is available or where it's being sold. They mean other dispensaries, I think, with that. I hope so. I hope they don't also mean like seed banks and lounges and things, because that's going to screw things up even more. But my understanding and my feeling on that is that's really just meant to be other medical marijuana outlets, and that they're not going to be doing that. But I sure hope they make that change, because the way it's written will be the way it's enforced, right? So you want to make sure the language is very clear and understandable, and that doesn't have a lot of gray areas in it.
Yeah. Well, that's my problem that from my first reading. Now, this is, to be fair, it's a 26-page report, document, or what, if you have it. Read through it, went through it, and took out what I could from it that I just thought was concerning. The word compliance. We learned from the licensed producer scheme that the federal government changed from 51 licenses being issued for licensed producers to if you meet compliance. And now I see here in this proposal that if you meet these criteria, this compliance, you will get a permit, and it's a promise on compliance. But it's so open-ended that they could just strike what's next in compliance. And on that note, what's your take on the safe issue? Because to me, that just rings bells for the LP thing and the level 7 compliance or higher vault that you would need to store your cannabis in overnight, because they're very broad in that stroke too. They're saying you need a safe, but they're not saying what you exactly need to store in there. And for larger dispensaries, as we know, that could be quite a bit. And if they strike that in as an X compliance, well, there's another upgrade. You need to get a safe.
Well, if it's just a safe, I mean, safes aren't that expensive, and you probably should be keeping valuable stuff in some kind of a secure facility necessarily. I don't think anybody wants to get robbed. I don't really see, though, dispensaries as being, like, the reason people might see it as being vulnerable to being robbed is because it's illegal, and they, if they rip you off your grow op, you don't call the police because they're going to charge you for growing marijuana. But if we got robbed, even now, if we got robbed, we would call the police, and I hope they would go after the person. Whether we get our marijuana back, I don't know, but I would not hesitate at all. And so there's been a couple of incidences where dispensaries have tried to be robbed, but I don't see it as being a major concern. I think it's in your own self-interest to keep your money and your property safe, and no business wants to get robbed. But, I don't think this is a secret attempt from the city to shut down dispensaries. If they wanted to do that, they would have shut them down already. So I don't think the goal is for them to get rid of dispensaries by creating regulations that are too hard for everybody to follow. But I do think they want to thin the number down. I think their goal is to reduce the number that's there and to have more oversight over what is there. And it would have been better for all of us if they come up with these regulations 2 years ago. Because then we all would have known what the rules were. We would have followed them. We would have not set up near those things. We would have tried to respect each other's space. But the city couldn't do that. Like this, we're thinking about it from our perspective, and we have to push for the best we can get. But the city of Vancouver is still under immense pressure from the federal government, from some people in the city, a minority who don't like dispensaries, and from other governments around the country as well, to not do this kind of stuff or to crack down. And so they're trying to find a middle ground where they can allow dispensaries to operate, but at the same time be seen as sort of responsible caretakers. And I think they needed the crisis to be there. They needed to be 80 dispensaries operating unregulated for them to be able to say, we got to do something. If they'd done it when there was only 4 or 5 of us, people would have gone, well, you're just jumping the gun and trying to allow these things. So they needed to have that situation in place. But I understand the political reality, but it sure sucks for everybody, myself included, who have invested a lot of time and money in getting locations set up. And especially if you just open and now you're being told, oh, sorry, you got to close or you got to move after you're just about to have your opening day coming up. That's brutal for people to have to deal with. And
your membership. I mean, relocating your membership.
Well, and the members
stuff
as well are going to have challenges. We in our East Hastings one, I feel we serve that community, and if we could, we find another spot somewhere else in the city, but those are our members. We're going to lose those people, and we have a relationship to them, so we'd like to be able to keep serving the people we have been. But and so we're going to fight the hardest we can, but I'm not optimistic that we're going to see huge changes to this as well. Like, I don't want to have a defeatist attitude, but I think that realistically, we got to pick our battles, and we have to decide as a community what are the 2 or 3 things that we want to focus on and try to get change. Because if we go in there saying we want cannabis regulated like coffee, and this is ridiculous, we want there to be 500 dispensaries. I demand the right to be able to sell marijuana right across from a preschool. I mean, I don't have any problem with those things philosophically, but we're not going to win those arguments. We're not.
No, because the court of public opinion is not going to sway that way.
Yeah, and I think people in Vancouver support dispensaries, support medical marijuana access, but I think if you tell them, should they not be near a school, most people would probably say, yeah, and maybe not everybody would, I don't know, but I think they're trying to appease both sides, right? And so we've got
to be fair, one of the stakeholders is the school board, so they're right. They're right in on this.
And like I said, the BCCS clubs has got a school nearby that interacts with them and is friendly towards them and does stuff. And we have done fundraising for the community center on the corner, and we helped build a little park in an empty lot at the end of our block. And I know that other dispensaries have tried to give back to their communities. I'm very grateful that we've had the opportunity to be where we are, and I've tried to make the community better, make our block better. And since we opened the seed bank and then the dispensary, I feel that block's gotten way better. There are schools that opened up. They've shut down now, but there was a school in the area. There was other businesses that have opened up and restaurants and that. And it's not solely because of us, but I do think we've had a big impact in making that block more livable and more attractive and a better place to be. And if we have to leave, I think it will kind of degenerate a little bit too.
I think anytime medical patients have to rely on a corner street drug dealer versus a proper storefront, it's just common sense dictates harm reduction for the medical patient, and reasonable and dignified access to their cannabis, which is something that to me is fundamental. So this comes down to compliance, land use, distancing regulations, and final operation regulations. So once again, I understand businesses normally need this, but like this safe, I think about cannabis, and then I think about other herbs down the street at the herb store. How come the herbs don't have to be locked up in a safe?
Because they're not worth $10 a gram.
I guess, but is it going to be worth $10 a gram after we legalize? I mean, realistically.
Well, I mean, we only sell for $8, but yeah, but I mean that and that's not going to be legalized yet, right? This is still a prohibition. This is really the Dutch model, is what they're putting in place in many ways, except with the medical overlay. But in Holland, it's the same backdoor, front door thing, right? Where it's marijuana is grown or smuggled in, hashish is smuggled in mostly to Holland or produce locally, that's illegal. And if you get caught, you'll be charged, and you won't get severe sentences in Holland, but you will still go to jail or get fines and lose your stuff. But once that cannabis is in the back door of the coffee shop, then it's cool. And when they sell it out the front door, that's regulated, and fees and taxes and all those things are put into place. And it's exactly what they're doing in Vancouver. They can't really regulate our suppliers. Although one day that will be nice, as long as they're reasonable regulations. I'd be happy to have the production end regulated too in some way.
On that note of, now again, going back to that word compliance, on that note of suppliers, what if we legalize, Justin goes ahead and legalizes, and they say, okay, you can grow X number of plants. However, you dispensaries, you have to buy from the MMPR, the only licensed producers in the country, which is, again, the licensed producers would just continue going. So what if they said you have to be like the clinic in St. Catharines in Alberta, and you need to order solely from them, and that is the new word of compliance? Then that would force.
Well, we have to see how things go in the future, right? But there's a lot of problems with that. And I'm glad that Vancouver is moving forward on this, because we don't want that kind of model of legalization to be the only one, the LP's monopoly one. But having this in place, and this is going to spread to other cities. Victoria's looking at it. Other cities are looking at it. A lot of cities are struggling with this, and they don't feel empowered to allow a dispensary, but they will. They'll say, well, we can do it. Vancouver can do it. Victoria can do it. We can do it. And so, if we have to buy from LPs, we're not going to be able to sell anything, because their rates are very high, and they don't have enough marijuana anyways, right? They can't even supply their own customers right now, so they wouldn't be able to hold that on. But if being a licensed producer was something that was more reasonable, more accessible, if most of our current suppliers could become licensed producers fairly easily, then that would be fine with me. But the current model of licensed producers, where you've got to have millions of dollars, you got to grow it in this crazy way, you can only supply certain things, that's not going to fly. And I feel that we're kind of the farmers market grassroots model compared to the sort of corporate model from the LPs. And at farmers markets, there's a little less kind of oversight of things, and a little more openness than you might get if you sell something in a grocery store. And so I'd kind of like to see that model happen. But at the same time, if somebody says you have to do more testing, or you have to regulate your products a little more, I'm all for that, as long as that doesn't push up the prices and limit access. If the goal is to increase quality without disrupting other forms of access, then I support that. That sounds good to me, and then we know everybody's operating on the same playing field.
Absolutely, and we to be fair, we've known, in 1997, there was a British Columbia Capacity Club Society, followed by the Green Cross. Shortly after that, yourself, laid it down with your dispensary, followed by your second dispensary now. So I'm just looking at this, for myself, I represent patients. So I'm looking at this from, where are these patients going to go should this proposal go through, and these clubs jump in and jump on board with it, and then that word compliance just keeps getting struck up to something that drives the price up and makes the end user pay more.
Well, and I wonder, I think I'd like to see what the market can bear, and to see things that way. And if we only end up with 50 clubs or 40 clubs or whatever the number is, are they going to have lineups down the street for those clubs? That could be disruptive as well if they're too busy.
Good point.
And that's a realistic thing, because I don't know of too many clubs in the city that are complaining about not being able to do business and not having enough clients. And so if we suddenly half or third, or cut a bunch of those clubs off, and people have to go elsewhere, that's it. Either they're going to go back to the street, which is what this is all trying to avoid, is street dealing and all the hassles for both for patients and for the city and everybody that comes with that, or they're going to be very, very busy, a limited number of very busy clubs, and that may not be what they want either. If the goal is to spread it out, they don't really want big lineups and people coming and going and that kind of activity. So, but whatever they do, I'm pretty sure that a year after they do it, there's going to be changes made. Because this is the first time a city's ever done this. It's a very new thing. They're under a lot of pressure from all directions. I think they're trying to do the right thing as much as they can. And I fully expect that within a year, they're going to find that some things worked, some things didn't work. Maybe they'll try to get rid of more clubs, or maybe they'll allow it more and open things up a little more. And probably it'll also depend on what happens federally. If we see a change in government, the city will feel more confident that they can kind of go forward and do stuff, and maybe. But what we hope is that whatever comes out of this, that it's a positive model that other cities can adopt, and that this spreads around the country. And it may not be perfect the first time around, and certainly I'm not the only person worried about the future of my dispensaries, but looking at it away from my personal needs and even from the patients that we're serving and sort of the broader thing of the country as a whole, I think it's a big step forward. Just like Washington State legalized marijuana, and their legalization has got tons of flaws in it. It's got a huge amount of problems. There's challenges. But I still supported it, even because it's very symbolic. It gives everybody else hope, and it lets other states and countries maybe do other things that might work a lot better. But we can't expect, to me, that the first go is going to be good. No, they're going to be bad. They're going to be dumb things that are overly cautious and overly restrictive. But it's because that's just how things are going to go, right? They didn't go from like, ending, the prohibition on gay sex to having gay marriage right away. Or there's a long gap in there. They didn't end slavery and then immediately go to having a black president. A lot of steps and missteps along the way. And so we're not going to go right from ending prohibition to having the ideal model that we want as a movement. But we never stop striving for that. And I said before, and I don't know if I'm going to end up with a license. I'm hoping I end up with at least one place. I've got two right now. I feel I got a good reputation. I've been around a long time. I'm hoping that I can keep, one or maybe two places going. But I will say that if I happen to be lucky enough to be one of those 50 people or whatever it is that have a license, I will not just be kicking back, counting my money and glad that I'm there. I will continue to fight, as I always have, for everybody to have access to. There'd be a lot of dispensaries. I didn't get into the marijuana movement 20 years ago so I could sell a lot of weed. Like, that's not, I don't even care about selling marijuana. I only do it because it's illegal and it needs to be done. And I want to lead others to doing it. But my goal is not to, have a bunch of dispensaries, get some kind of marijuana monopoly and then retire or whatever. All the money I make in all my projects goes into legalization. And I feel a lot of the other dispensaries are the same way. I can't speak for everyone, and some of them have different motivations, but a lot of the people that I've seen who get into this, they're not in this for themselves. They're patients who want to help other patients, or they're people that believe in marijuana. And I hope that those are the ones that end up getting licenses and being able to continue so that we can see the benefits of having a license redirected back into the activist community, and not have the situation where people who've got licenses are then lobbying to keep other people from having licenses or lobbying against the expansion. I would not be doing that. I always welcome more people.
On that note, now in the proposal they say that they want to bring these clubs in, put them through staging, so that they can put them into compliance, similar to they did with the LPs, and filter out what they're going to do. What they also said is that they're not going to issue any new applicants post that time. So
Right.
there's going to be no more issued licenses. So
not ever, but not for a while anyways. They might decide to redo some in the future at some point, right? But I think they're going to have a cutoff date. They're gonna settle it out. There's going to be a certain number of dispensaries left. Then they're going to see what happens, because they don't really know. This is the first time for the city too, right? But they're not going to keep picking new ones for a little while, I think, and maybe ever. Maybe they'll wait a year and then I don't know, but I hope that that the way it works is that they go, oh, that worked pretty good with 50, but they're kind of busy and there's more demand. Let's open it up more now. Let's change it. They could only be 100 meters apart from each other. Let's get rid of that rule altogether, because who cares if two are next door to each other, or find some other ways of allowing there to be more. And I hope that's the direction it goes. And I kind of expect it will. I see it moving, and in Holland, like I mentioned before, it's up to each city kind of just to decide how they want to deal with it. And some cities have lots of coffee shops, and some don't have any, and some have drive-through ones, and there's all different kinds of models there. And I think that we're going to see, some of this across Canada. But I feel this is kind of the first template for legalization in Canada, and that these dispensaries could just, have it not be a medical focus. And then you've got coffee shops and legalization.
And on that note, something I said on 420 on the stage was how Allard sets precedents. I had John Conroy sitting up there with me, and I just ran it by him, made sure that before I went and said it to everybody that it was 100% on point. That Allard does set precedents for legalization in this country. And I find it interesting, even in the proposal, they mention the court hearings and the injunctions and stuff like that are in place for reasoning for moving forward with the proposal, because they know this court case in Allard could take 3 to 5 years. They can't allow, like you just hit the nail on the head, the explosion. We went up to 80 clubs from, in the past 3 years. I think there was like a threefold or something in clubs. That's like explosive here in the city. So they had to do something to regulate it. I guess my only question is, people look to yourself as a leader. We've had, Jamie from the CAMCD on here to talk about dispensaries in general. What would you say to people out of any concern, barring what we've discussed, any additional concerns that you see in this initial reading? Now, no, I agree with you, nothing's perfect, and anything that is progressive is good, provided it's for a free and fair market in BC. That's what I care about.
Well, the main issues I have, I think the no edibles and the buffer zone between dispensaries and between community things should be smaller. The $30,000 fee or $35,000 plus, that's an issue, but realistically, if I got to pay 35 grand or whatever, we can do that if that's what it takes to keep the doors open. That won't really affect patients or our ability to function that much, other than it just means that there's 40 grand less for us to donate to the community, because we certainly direct a lot of our money back into good causes, including court cases and many other things.
Actually, on that note, I give a huge shout out for your work in the HIV/AIDS community. I mean, you do a lot of donations around. I see Sensible BC and the dispensary in general donating all around Vancouver for various events, including the various charities and stuff that you donate to.
The dispensary, we support a number of community groups, and I think other ones do as well. I don't know, but I think that that money, that $35,000 that goes to the city or whatever it is, some of it's going to come out of that budget and other things. But ultimately, I don't really care too much about the money. If we have to pay that money, we can. I care more about being able to provide edibles and preserving as many dispensaries as possible that are out there now. And so those are the two things that I think maybe we can move the city on a little bit. And I really think people, if you want to have an impact, come to the city hall meetings and testify. Come out there. They need bodies to be at those meetings. You've got to register in advance. They've got one coming up on Tuesday, but that meeting's not so important. That one, there won't be a chance to speak. It's just the city kind of passing first reading like a bill in Parliament that we're going to look at this and we accept this tentatively, but we're going to think about it. Then they're going to host a whole city meetings people can come and speak at. And those are going to go all day long. My understanding is the city staff are adding in a bunch of extra days because they know that we're going to flood these things, and they hear everybody. As long as you register to speak, you'll get to speak. So we need to register thousands of people to speak.
The call out to our people is to register. Where can we point them?
Well, you can't register yet because they haven't announced the dates for those hearings yet. If you check out Sensible BC when the time comes, and probably you'll put it on the Cannabis in Canada page too, I imagine. Absolutely. So we'll release those dates once we know. But I don't know exactly what they're going to be. And I don't know exactly how long you have to register to speak. But there's going to be several days of these hearings. There's going to be, I imagine, hundreds of people, if not more, coming out. And we need to have people explaining why they need edibles, why it's important for them that this dispensary stay open, which might be in an exclusion zone, or how it's benefited them and how some of these rules are going to hurt them. No. And it's got to be an emotional kind of plea to the councillors. It's their chance to sit and listen and see. I think that most of them already support medical cannabis and believe in it, but they need to see how some of these specific rules are going to cause problems and maybe have unintended consequences. No. And so that's the main focus for our effort. And then on the other end of things, we're also, Sensible BC is going to be working with dispensaries to try to coordinate that, to get people there. We've got a pretty good phone bank, so we'll be calling people and trying to organize it. Then on the other end, we also want to fight back against the federal government, because Rona Ambrose is in the media now saying Vancouver should shut down every dispensary. And even though I'm the head of the medical marijuana program, marijuana is not a medicine. And patients just believe that it helps them. And so the courts did this thing based on their belief, but we know that marijuana is not a medicine and they're wrong. And so she's basically saying that you're delusional. You think marijuana helps you. It's in your mind. It's just your belief, and you've got some problem because you're too stoned. That's very insulting.
I've often said, honestly, Dana, that for 13 years, how can this country say that there's a marijuana for, in the old case, medical marijuana access regulations, now marijuana for medical purposes, and yet the country Canada holds there's no medical value to cannabis. It's in our legal documents.
She's twisted in knots. The reporter keeps asking her, don't you run the medical marijuana program that supplies cannabis?
That's the hypocrisy.
She's like, well, we do have tight regulations on this program, and yes, it's under strict doctor supervision, but no, marijuana is not a medicine, and so doctors prescribe it to people, but it's still not and she just sounds like a crazy person when she's saying this, but we're trying to organize a week of action. We did this last year. People called Health Canada for one day. We basically shut down Rona Ambrose's office and Health Canada with calls from patients. We did it before when they were making people throw their cannabis away with kitty litter, which your injunction stopped from happening, but we had a call of that. And so if you're really mad about this, we want people to start calling Health Canada. It'll be on we just decided this morning, so I don't have a ton of details yet, but it'll be on the Sensible BC website. But it's going to be the Monday the 11th, if that's the right date, Monday the 11th through to the Friday. And there'll be about 5 numbers to call. Her Rona Ambrose's personal office, her constituency office, the Health Canada office, their PR person's office, or the media relations office, and I don't know, one other number that I forget who it is. But all the Health Canada medical marijuana people should be getting calls from patients, and everybody who knows somebody who used medical cannabis, to explain to them that cannabis is good medicine, that it's not just in our minds that we're some kind of delusional people, but educate them on some facts and let them know that kind of statement is not valid. And calling for us to shut down dispensaries, we might have some issues with these regulations, but the city of Vancouver is on our side, and Rona Ambrose is not, and she needs to be told to lay off Vancouver and other cities. So that's a big push we're going to be doing, and I hope that we can get our phones ringing off the hook and basically shut down their office for that week.
We already proved her to be lying about medical patients with fire, mold, and organized crime in relation to our gardens, and we proved her wrong once again with her lack of understanding about how cannabis truly does help medical patients, and places such as your dispensary truly help the citizens of Vancouver and, by extension, BC.
You talk about how their worries and lies were exposed during the trial.
Exactly.
When they were unable to really justify any of these grandiose claims they make and everything. Yeah, absolutely. It's great being on the stand and being able to really get somebody to ask those questions, because the prohibitionists don't like to debate. They don't like to be in the same room as us. They like to give their stuff their carefully selected trigger words. And she talks a lot about children and minors and that thing, and then the reporter's sister, but that doesn't really apply to dispensaries because they're all 19 or over unless there's some special consideration. And she's like, yes, but it normalizes marijuana and creates this perception that it's normal, and therefore the kids are going to start smoking all the reefer and going crazy. And it was really shocking to hear those kind of statements. So we got to push back on that. We got to let them know. So I think we got to push both ways. Push Vancouver to make better rules, push back on the federal government to get them to butt out of it. And that'll also make more room for Vancouver if the federal government gets a pushback, that they know we got their back on this and we want to try to work together as much as possible.
It's historic times we're living in, Dana. You know, I got to thank you again for coming on the show. And just in closing, is there, of course, everybody check out sensiblebc.ca and always stay up to date with what Dana's doing here in the province of BC and Canada-wide. Sensible BC's expanded now across Canada to do additional things. And most importantly, for those that need service, where can they find you, Dana?
Our dispensary at cannabisdispensary.ca, cannabisdispensary.ca. And we do mail order all across the country, although that's one of the things they want us to stop doing as well. So we'll see how that goes, but that is on the list of no-nos. So,
well, just for now, actually, I said in closing, but here on that note, the one thing I said is if they go ahead and pass this proposal and they allow these dispensaries, you know, the block of the no mail order is one thing, but is that not just going to open up a flood to, like you said, other cities? The word I got was that Victoria's already looking at this. They're already looking at parroting what
I think a lot of other cities, there's a lot of dispensaries out there that have been opening, and communities have been grappling with this, not just in BC, but across Canada. I know people in Saskatchewan that are running dispensaries, and people are talking, you know, there's a lot of them and a lot more to come. And I really think that's where the action is going to be, outside of Vancouver, in other areas. And who's going to try to open one up in Surrey in a big public way, or Delta or Richmond, and see what those cities do. But ultimately, I think that cities that support this are going to see this as an option. And even if they're, you know, if you live in Surrey or any other city, you can say, look, Vancouver's doing it, so we can do it too. You can't just pass this off to the federal government anymore. That's what Sensible BC was about at the provincial level, that we can do this. And all this saying we're totally, only the federal government can do it, and the feds say only the UN treaties, and no, we can do it. Every level of government participates in prohibition, and every level can take a stand against it. And Vancouver can do this, other cities can do it, and I think it's going to inspire a lot of people. And even if our Vancouver model isn't totally perfect, it's going to be something that other cities are going to try and refine and work on. Vancouver itself can change it every year or two if we need to refine. And as the federal scene changes and the federal laws change, they'll also probably be changing it to keep in step with that. But I think it's important that we have a solid network of dispensaries, grassroots dispensaries in place when legalization happens, so that can be an option, and we don't just look at the corporate LP model, that we've got a working model with, hopefully, you know, in the next year, hundreds of dispensaries across the country that got business licenses and are accepted by their city councils as a valuable place.
Absolutely.
That's my vision, and I hope that's what happens.
Awesome. Well, once again, we need to keep hitting them constitutionally, we need to keep hitting them politically, and we need to keep hitting them municipally, and following our leaders and staying united in the cannabis culture. Dana Larsen, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, always.
Stay tuned for more on cannabisincanada.ca. Cheers.